Good evening. Yes, I'd like to welcome you all also on behalf of the Cancer Institute. This series of presentations is designed to bring forward provocative topics, as we've certainly heard today from Dr. Davis, a very interesting talk that provides much to think about in terms of cell phone use. I just wanted to just take 2 or 3 minutes to touch on some of the epidemiologic considerations in studying this association. This is basically the conundrum, I think, that Deborah confronted us with at the beginning of her talk, that there is at this point little epidemiologic evidence to support these associations, and she's absolutely correct that that does not necessarily mean that there are no associations. But I think we can do a better job in epidemiology to sort this out, as I'll touch on in a few minutes. So this slide just simply shows that the number of subscribers in millions, as we all know, of course, is increasing dramatically, beginning roughly in the late 90s, middle 90s to late 90s, with more common cell phone use. And it just keeps going up and up. And on the bottom part of the slide is the death rate from brain cancer, which to this point in time is really showing no increase at all. Now, as Deborah pointed out, this doesn't by any means refute the possibility that there is an association. But as of this time, there really is these kinds of associations aren't clear from this type of presentation. And this just simply shows the same by age category. So for brain cancer, no clear evidence. Deborah showed data on parotid gland cancer from Israel, and that's interesting that the rates are increasing there. Whether that's related to cell phone use, that's a hypothesis that's being evaluated. Just to mention briefly 2 of the more recent studies, epidemiologic studies on brain cancer, just to give you a feel for how these studies operate. This study carried out by Hardell in Scandinavia studied some 350 brain cancer cases and 2 control groups, and identified that the case group on average reported more use of mobile phones prior to the development of their disease. So you can see these data roughly showing a 2.5-fold increase in risk for subjects who used cell phones for greater than 10 years, or with a greater than 10 years since they first started using cell phones, and also higher risks in those that were using cell phones for the longest, or the greatest amount of time, greater than 2,000 hours in this study. So that study concluded that there is an association. And then there's a second large study, and we'll hear a little more about this from the next speaker, the Interphone study that included some 2,700 well, actually more than 5,000 brain cancer cases, and split into these 2 most common forms of brain cancer. And this study was carried out in 13 countries. Overall, in this much, much larger study, there was no association found with brain cancer. And the authors concluded from their data that there was no clear evidence from the study of an association, although they did find what they referred to as possible effects in long-term heavy users. In this particular category, where you would probably, if there was an effect, you'd probably expect to see it there first. So perhaps that's a signal, indeed, even in this large overall negative study, that something may be going on. So these case control studies that have been carried out, and there have been others, but these 2 kind of typify the spectrum. The way these studies are done is people are interviewed after they've developed disease. So the cases have brain cancer in this example, and the controls don't. And people are asked to report about details of their prior use of phones. And as you can imagine, this type of investigation does suffer the criticism that people who have a disease may have different perceptions. They may have more accurate perceptions, for that matter, or less accurate, but different perceptions of what actually went on in their history than a person who didn't have a disease. So not to say that's the case, but this is a concern with case control studies. So I think as an epidemiologist, I think what's needed are prospective studies where people are enrolled into a study during the period when they're healthy and when phone use can be ascertained in an unbiased fashion, and then these people should be followed in time to determine what their disease outcomes are. I believe Deborah has also advocated for this approach. So I think that would go a long ways towards resolving some of these questions. As I said, there's no apparent trend of increasing risk. Glucose, the findings on glucose metabolism kind of broke through a sort of a barrier that cell phones don't really do anything, because these are human studies and it does show physiologic effects in the brain. And that seems to be fairly convincing evidence. Doesn't mean that glucose metabolism equals brain cancer, but it is a sign that there are changes occurring. So this is of concern. And there have been mechanistic studies that have looked at classic changes that one would expect in cells exposed to a carcinogen, for example, the fracturing of a chromosome. And these studies have not shown associations with radio frequency radiation. So there's still a lot of questions, and I think Dr. Davis did an excellent job of showing you some of the very new and very provocative information that's coming forward that now needs to be carried to further studies to get a much better handle on what's actually going on. So that's kind of the science and I guess more the epidemiology side of it. I guess I would just want to say just a thought. I don't have a final opinion on this, but I think just a thought to throw out to you about policy. When does a government that's acting in our best interest step in and make changes? How strong does that evidence have to be that there's something going on? And I'm not going to try to answer that question, but I think it's something worth thinking about in a situation where there is cause to be concerned about these issues, but there's still a great deal of uncertainty about whether they're real or not. So.